Hi, I'm James Patrick, the director of Big Picture. In this interview, I spoke with a friend, Douglas Macgregor, former colonel in the Army and advisor to President Trump. In this interview, I asked him what he thinks about the Ukraine war. Is all this really helping Ukraine? Is this helping America? Let's hear what he has to say.
We think of ourselves as this invincible, invulnerable colossus that bestrides the world. We're not. And we are failing to invest where we need to here at home. We are not investing in high-end manufacturing. We're not investing in energy. We're not investing in the agricultural sector. These are our great strengths that we should capitalize on. We're not doing it. And instead of fearing China, what we should do is limit our exposure where we think that they present a threat to us economically, but stop this ridiculous nonsense of going to war yet again 6,000 miles from the United States over an obscure island called Taiwan. That's silly. It's nonsensical. Just as fighting the Russians in Ukraine is nonsensical for us. It's irrelevant. It's crazy. Over time, the Ukrainian government in Kiev began actively oppressing the Russian-speaking population. Russians inside Ukraine, even though they were Ukrainian citizens, effectively became second-class citizens. And so conflict was just a question of when, no longer if. Ukraine has an interesting history. The Ukraina, the word itself means on the periphery or on the margin or on the edge, depending upon how you want to translate it. The problem for the Russians is this. We have said that we will not relent, that we are going to fight them until they're destroyed. If you tell the Russians that, the Russians say to themselves, well, this war will only end when we are on the Polish border. That's a terrible situation, frankly, for Ukraine, because we've said we will not negotiate. I think the only thing that we've done is played a key role in the destruction of Ukraine. And from the very beginning, I had said to several people, Ukraine is to the Russians essentially what Mexico is to us. If we discovered there was a large army that was built exclusively for the purpose of attacking the United States, and its goal was to quote-unquote liberate New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and Southern California from the evil white Yankees, I think we would have acted instantly to destroy that army. The Russians have essentially done the same thing. So there was never any chance that the Ukrainians were going to win an all-out war with Russia. And right now, they've got an all-out war with Russia. Well, you've got a nation of over 140 million fighting a country of, 37 million, now down to somewhere between 18 and 22 million. I don't think there's much chance that the nation of 140 million is going to lose. And then finally, the Russians are sitting on territory that has the resources, the manufacturing, the industry, the technical development that represents about 90% of Ukrainian gross national product. They already control it, and they're not going to leave it. So how does prolonging this war help Ukraine? I don't think it does. I don't see any evidence for it. When you deal with the military and the political leadership in Washington, the key questions that are never asked is, first of all, what is the purpose of this operation? And then someone says, well, the purpose is to remove Putin from power. Well, that's a dumb idea because it's not going to happen. If that's your goal, that objective makes no sense. So give me another objective. Well, we want to hurt the Russians. Well, in what regard? Well, we're going to sanction them. Well, we already know that the sanctions have failed. There's no chance of destroying the Russian economy through sanctions. On the contrary, the ruble is now one of the strongest currencies in the world. And the Russian economy has actually thrived because there are plenty of people in the world that want to do business with the Russians because the Russians have an abundance of food and abundance of resources, mineral resources, oil, natural gas. So if that's the case, that's not a reasonable objective. So give us another objective. We never go through that. Well, if you don't ask the first question, what's the purpose, and come up with something reasonable, the second question is, how do you plan to do this? And no one ever sat down, well, we're just going to drop an avalanche of equipment on top of the Ukrainians. We're going to give them our best intelligence. That should be enough. Finally, what do you want it to look like when it's over? Well, we want Russia to be destroyed and Putin to be gone. Well, again, this is absurd. This is nonsensical. What are you talking about? It is crazyville. So you don't have responsible, mature, balanced diplomats and military commanders talking to you. You're talking to people who are worse than amateurs. They're ideologically blinded to reality. Their hatred has unbalanced them. What difference did it make to us whether Ukraine was neutral or not? None. We should have made it neutral. When Eisenhower was president, he ultimately welcomed Austria's neutrality because he argued that we don't have the resources to defend all these countries. The more neutral states we create, the easier the military burden is on us. Well, that was in the 1950s when we were certainly stronger conventionally than we are today. And if you look at the balance of power between the various states, we're dealing with a continental power in Russia. We're primarily a maritime and aerospace power. Our strength is really at sea and in the air. We are only a land power in the Western Hemisphere. So the notion that somehow or another we're going to take on and defeat a continental power is ludicrous nonsense. And fearing China, what we should do is limit our exposure where we think that they present a threat to us economically. Remember, China abandoned communism in the early 1990s. That's what people don't seem to understand. We keep saying the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party. I challenge anybody to find a communist in China. These people are capitalists. They understand how to make money. And what China wants to do is wants to transform itself into some facsimile of Singapore. By the way, so do the Japanese and the Koreans. They're all very enamored of the Singaporean model. Well, that's reprehensible to us because we'd say Singapore is a fascist state, which of course it is. It's a partnership between the corporations and the government that goes far beyond anything we imagine. And then the rules and laws of those areas are strictly enforced by the government, and the government owns virtually all of the property. We don't understand Asia. We don't understand the people in Asia. We absolutely do not understand the Chinese and what they want. They do not want to live in a liberal democracy as we imagine it. They don't want to elect a president from a multi-party system. Xi is effectively the modern equivalent of the Chinese emperor. And they're very happy with that because they see that as absolutely essential to their security. And what are the three things that the Asians expect from their government? They expect security from external attack. And that was something the Chinese emperors failed miserably to do in the last 200 years of Chinese imperial rule. They expect the people to be fed, something else that the emperors failed to do at the end of their dynasty or dynastic succession. And three, they expect the population to be sheltered. Now, if you look at those three things, the Chinese leadership today has done those things very well. If you compare China to, say, India, there is none of the crippling poverty, the horrific poverty that you see on the streets in India does not exist in China. And China has 1.4 billion people. Those three things are what they want. We in the United States should be demanding something similar from our own government. Security, number one, for our country. And that has been treated with complete contempt, if not total disinterest. If they were really interested in protecting us, we wouldn't have this wave of criminality sweeping across the country. We wouldn't have these open borders. How many repeat criminals do we routinely apprehend that have been released for all sorts of terrible crimes, who've been deported and keep coming back? What sort of nonsense is this? Why do we tolerate these things? We have a government that seems to be suicidal here at home and suicidal overseas. They're picking enemies that we cannot take on and defeat, nor should we try, and we don't have to. And at the same time, they're doing things here at home that are destructive to our society. It's hard to imagine a worse set of circumstances. And the question is not so much, what do we do about the government? What do we do about the American people? Who are the Americans? Where are they? What are they doing? When are they standing up and saying, no more? We will not tolerate this any longer. It hasn't happened because here, the standard of living is still too high. Life is still too easy. I think the current financial and economic crisis is about to change that. And so perhaps that will awaken the American people to their responsibilities to themselves. And maybe then we'll get a different government that wants to protect us, that wants to feed us, that wants to